And so this is Friday, which is the end of the week, and it's just as well because I'm not feeling too good, but Pat's feeling a lot worse, aren't you, Pat?
I finally succumbed to the dreaded COVID.
But you must see you're manning up to magnificent. If it was me, I'd be lying back and saying, "Come look after me."
No, what do you call it? Tested positive on Wednesday morning, but Jude had been working for a while, so anyway, we'll get on with it.
Aye. Okay. Well, we'll not engage in too much small talk because it'll inevitably revolve around the virus.
In case I fall off in the middle of this discussion.
Yeah, we'll know what has happened if you disappear from the screen. Okay. Well, President Zelensky was addressing a number of places this past week. The Greek Parliament and more closer to home, the Oireachtas. And got a very fine reception from the Oireachtas. Yeah. Everybody was on their feet at the end and giving him a standing ovation. Yeah. Except for, as it happens, I think it was the people before profit. They stood up, but they didn't clap. So what should he be happy with the response he got from them well,
he should be happy with it. But I noticed there's a sort of a wee bit of divergence. I don't know what's the right term. He was also addressing the Greek Parliament yesterday, and there was considerable controversy following that. But let's stick to the one about Dublin first. Now, here I hold the view that Zelensky is doing a great job. I hold the view that he's fighting for his country, and I think he is a genuine hero. And I don't think people before profit are genuinely. I think there's a time and place for protest. I really genuinely, but on the scale of what's happening in Ukraine, I don't think it's these gesture politics. The reason we're not giving him our full support is that he's now bringing in NATO and the Azov group in Ukraine and so on, and he's also but give out arms to the people, and it's going to create all sorts of problems and all. Dude, all those things are wonderful, but hey, what's the man supposed to do when his country has been invaded by one of the biggest countries in the world? I agree totally. There's principal things, but Jude, I don't think this is the time nor the place to make those gestures sort of protests.
Well, it's very difficult. Certainly, the vast majority, virtually all of the TDs and senators were right behind him 100% and were clapping and so on. Although I don't know if he gave a dig at some earlier stage about the degree to which Ireland was remaining neutral. Was that right? Not at that address.
No, I think Micheál Martin said that was totally misinterpreted.
That's right.
That Zelensky, that was not the impression he got from Zelensky. And Zelensky this week was very, very magnanimous towards Ireland.
Yeah. Well, what I thought when I saw it, Pat, is I thought, here's a man, as you say, who's representing his country. I mean, he emerges from, he was a comedian. Yeah. And to be projected into the role he's playing, and he's playing it very well. He's a man who's leading his people, and they're under it seems the most appalling bloody slaughter. Right. I mean, Russia said that some of these events were staged, and then when this was being reported, they cut away to, acres and acres of totally destroyed buildings and rubble. And you don't stage manage that kind of thing. That's
that's what I should see. I think that the Russian thing is starting to unravel. There's independent proof now. There's video taken while the Russians were still in Mariupol and various independent dated where there's bodies in the street. So they claim that these bodies only appeared after they left.
Not at all.
Just before we leave this, I thought it was interesting. No, there's been almost unanimity, but when he was addressing the Greek Parliament, he got a standing ovation, Zelensky. But afterwards, during his presentation, there were these guys from the Azov Brigade made a presentation, made a few comments. And I was in Crete years ago, and I went to this town square, and I saw this statue or memorial thing, and there was a Greek guy standing beside me who spoke English. I said, "What's this about?" And he says that this is where our people were murdered by the Nazis during the Second World War. So the Greeks, the Azov are supposed to be fascists. They're the far right, and they took grave exceptions to being addressed in their own parliament by sort of Nazis. So after Zelensky spoke, Alex Tapiras, remember he was the guy with Varoufakis who led the revolt during the recession in Greece.
Oh yeah.
He's a leftist, and he said he took exception to it. Now the Greek Prime Minister and all the parliamentarians clapped and so on, but there was a fierce backlash afterwards on social media, and the Greek government said they apologise for the Azov Brigade being involved in the address to their parliament. So you know, the politics is still at play.
Well, I tend to have great sympathy for the Ukraine. The people have obviously suffered terribly. They're putting up a terrific fight. They're getting arms from the West, of course. But I mean, here's Zelensky, and then he knows if the Russians come in, his chances of even surviving, let alone being deep toppled, is reasonably slim, I would say. So I would applaud their heroism or heroics that they're showing. But at the back of my head, Pat, at the back of my head, there's a little niggle that tells me we're being given a kind of children's simplified version of events.
Of course we are, Jude, and we all know it. By the way, Jude, they've also banned, Zelensky has banned 11 opposition parties, claiming, now maybe at an emergency, he said they've ties to Russia, and I know people do, but Jude, see when all this, so we are given the Ladybird book of this conflict. There's no doubt, but Jude, you have to take that on the basis Russia has invaded Ukraine. Ukraine has not invaded Russia.
I take that point all right. I'd be fearful that it would be lost, and there's a real danger it will be lost, especially if the Russians are repulsed or eventually give up as they did in Afghanistan. I mean, we mustn't forget the Russians aren't a really big, strong state. They are a state with nuclear weapons, and they have a fair-sized army, but they aren't really a great power in that sense.
But they're not. They're actually, in real terms, they're below Britain as an economic terms. Britain's not a world leader in economics.
No.
Like it's not a Germany, it's not a China, and it's not an America. So
Anyway, I think I like that your phrase, the ladybird version of things. I think that's just about right. Not that it's untrue, but it is leaving out a lot of things that are more complicated that might be. We're
not getting. You're 100% right, Jude. We're not getting the full picture, and that will emerge through time.
Okay, good. Let's move on then to events near home. And you read this article. I didn't read it, but Gather Brian Feeney has been saying that Dublin has got to change its attitude to Northern nationalism, and really, you know, that effectively means to Sinn Féin. But can I say? Why would he be calling for that now when he could have been calling for it for the last 30 years, roughly?
Well, in fairness, I think Finney has been, I regard Finney as a pretty good, okay, his background would have been SDLP, but anyway, let's get, Jude, let me tell you a quick story, and that'll sort of explain where I'm coming from in this as well. About 2000, whatever it was, 16 or 17, before Martin McGuinness pulled the plug on Stormont Assembly, I was walking up Fylde Street in Derry, and I met a man, I'll just call him Noel. Noel was a wee man I knew, and he's interested in politics. And he turned around and he says, hey, Pat, things are not going good. This was about December. He says, things are definitely not going good up in Stormont. And he says, it's not looking good at all. And I says, is that right? And we stood and chatted 10 minutes. Anyway, fast forward to about the 15th of January, a very ill-looking Martin McGuinness walks in and he says, I'm pulling down Stormont because of the RHA, and so on. Tommy Gorman, the news, the political editor of RT, comes on the 6 o'clock news and says the move has totally taken the government, and the Kenny's government it was, totally by surprise. They didn't see it coming. Now, there's a mutual friend of ours who was a diplomat at the time, and I was talking to him, and I said to him, what's going on there? He says, the Dublin government hasn't been talking to Sinn Féin for well over a year. They haven't had a meeting or all the rest of it. In fact, Enda Kenny sent up a couple of Minister for Foreign Affairs who were antipathetic towards Sinn Féin big time, namely Charlie Flanagan, and he refused. So here we are now in a situation where Sinn Féin look like being the biggest party in Northern Ireland, could be the biggest party in the South, and the Dublin government, as we speak, doesn't really have a great relationship with them. Now, Jude, if Dublin, Micheál Martin's government or Leo Varadkar's government want to seriously navigate the road ahead in the coming years, they better get some sort of relationship going with Sinn Féin.
Well, yes and no, Pat, I think. Yes, I mean, that's the way you should treat your political opponents. You engage with them, you argue with them, and so on. You find out what their views are, and you find out to what extent they're different from your own. But the fact of the matter is, I think that Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil know quite well what the views of Sinn Féin are, and they know that if Sinn Féin becomes, as it has already become, a major party in the south, it's going to disrupt the balance. The balance that's been there since the Civil War. And if Sinn Féin was to get into government, it would really upset the balance, because that would mean inevitably either Fine Gael or Fianna Fáil, or maybe parts of both, would wither on the vine. So of course they're going to be want to do everything possible to block it. I'll give you an example quickly. I see where I think it was Micheál Martin said we really should need, and so did the Taoiseach, no, not the Taoiseach, Minister for Foreign Affairs said, Coveney said, we really should think about our Irish neutrality, and we should think, I think it was Martin said, we should think of setting up a citizens' assembly to investigate this question of our neutrality. And yet neither of the two will do the thing that any number of Northerners are begging them to do, and that is, and including Sinn Féin, and that is set up a citizens' assembly with regard to any border poll or any possible United Ireland of the future. I mean, that shows to me that they choose to ignore pressing and very important matters because they know it's going to somehow impact on them politically. Whereas the popular thing to do is to say, oh, we've got to think about our neutrality. It's the old thing of being concerned about stuff that's relatively far away and ignoring the stuff that's right under your nose.
Yeah, Jude, I don't know where I'm going with this, but let me tell you, because I had COVID and I was bored out of my skull, I've had Pat Coogan's book, The Troubles, up on that shelf for about 15 years, maybe 20. And it was a bit like bringing coals to Newcastle, because I was living it day and daily and I never got around to reading it. Yeah. But on Wednesday morning, I said, right, I've nothing to do and I don't want to sit watching TV or whatever. So I brought it down, started reading. Now, Jude, the first two chapters, and like, forget your Owen Harris's and your Ruth Dudley Edwards and all the rest of it. If you want a definitive, in my opinion, history, and it's written impartially, it's just factual, and it's very, very detailed. The first two chapters of Pat Coogan's book, The Troubles, explains totally the setting up of Northern Ireland and the background to it and all the rest of it. Now, Jude, I think it would help the Dublin government and Micheál Martin and Leo Varadkar if they read the first two chapters of that book. Oh,
yeah, certainly would, but of course they'll not do it. They'll not do it. They've got their own. They've got their own historians, so to speak, who will give a version of events of the past and will give advice regarding the future, which will be a long way, let's say, from Pat Coogan's view on things. Incidentally, this isn't directly what we're talking about, but just linked to it. I was listening to William Crawley yesterday, was it yesterday or the day before, on Talkback, and he was talking about this thing, you know, the way museums around the world
I've been asked to get the Elgin marbles and all.
Elgin marbles, repatriate them because they were taken or even stolen from these various countries.
Oh, I know where you're going to go with this. Keep going.
All right, you finish it then, Pat.
Does it include giving back land?
Well, I just thought, no, where would you stand?
Or Northern Ireland?
Where would you stand in terms of artifacts? Do you think that makes sense, that museums should look at these things that were taken from countries without the permission of the people who lived in the countries and displayed around the world?
Jude, without question, the Elgin marbles have no right to be in London whatsoever. And there's a whole lot of, but by the way, they were taken by force, as far as I remember, by British troops. You know, Jude, there's no morality whatsoever and them having things. And as well, Jude, a lot of the ancient things of like the Aborigines, a lot of stuff, their stuff was taken, I know, their sacred stuff. And the same across some of the old cultures. You know, these are trophies of war. No, the whole thing, Jews, these were secret symbols from a lot of these tribes and all, and they should belong to them and they should be sent back to them. And the immorality of stealing stuff from other people and saying, "Oh, this is ours," rubbish, absolute rubbish.
You were laughing earlier on about the notion that there might be land that the British had taken.
Was that where you were going, by the way?
I was exactly where I was going. And you laughed at it. I tend to laugh at it myself, but is there any serious side to that? I mean,
That's it.
is there not a parallel? Is there not a parallel
Absolutely.
between the taking of land and the taking of artifacts?
Yeah, should they've had to hand back half of Africa, and like and the last colony will be Northern Ireland.
Aye, but you see, it's deeper than that. If you take South Africa, for example, the blacks who lived in the land were kicked off it, and these white settlers set up these big farms. Now, I don't think, I may be wrong about this, but I don't think that Nelson Mandela redistributed land whenever South Africa got its independence, and he was applauded for that. That he didn't, disrupt, I suppose, the economy of the country.
That's exactly what he was at. I read his book, and basically what worried him was he wanted evolution, not revolution. He said what would happen was if they went for a revolution, or like I'm paraphrasing now, that it would basically just leave everybody poor. But he wanted sort of evolutionary change, that the blacks would eventually get a fair play. But he was smart enough to realize, what happened in Rhodesia, where Mugabe, Jude, that was once the breadbasket of Africa.
Yeah. But if you take the history of Ireland, I mean, everybody in the history books, whether it's Unionist or Protestant schools or Catholic schools or any school, we're all taught about the Plantation of Ulster, and that consisted of taking the land from the Irish, sending them to Connaught or wherever, and you brought in then all sorts of people from Scotland, from London, guilds. In other words, they came in and settled on the land which wasn't theirs originally. So should that just be left? Should we do as Nelson Mandela did and say, yeah, that's okay? Or am I talking nonsense to even mention it?
I don't think we could go back now 400 years or 500 years, whatever it was, the Plantation of Ulster. What was it, 1607? I doubt if we can hardly go back and find title. And as well as that, wee Sammy McClemens, whose grandfather and great-grandfather and great-great-grandfather farmed land outside Ballymena. I don't think I'd be walking up and saying, hey, Sammy, by the way, no, about 300 years ago, cheer, bugger off. It's not going to happen, Jude. And by the way,
no, that's true. But you see, it's kind of like the States. In a way, because there's no way that the United States is ever going to give them all their land back, Manhattan back to the native people. It's just not going to happen. But that doesn't make it any less an injustice that it was taken from them in the first place.
Absolutely. No, your point's 100% accurate. So, something that was stolen and someone that was misused, the fact that the fact that 300 years has passed doesn't make it right.
Should that be even talked about? Say in a discussion like on William Crawley's there, where they're talking about stuff taken, artifacts taken. Is it rude to bring up that fact?
Yeah, Jude, it is, and I'll tell you why. I got into a big discussion with a sort of a loyalist one day, and he started coming out with this crap that one of the big fears that Sinn Féin, when they took over, would it'd be like Mugabe and Rhodesia or Zimbabwe, whatever you like to call it, and so on, and that there were secret plans to take over Protestant land, and we're going to be forced out at the point of gun. And I said, it's the biggest load of crap. I dealt with Martin McGuinness and any number of Shinners, Mitchell McLaughlin, you name them, and even various people over the years, and had numerous discussions, and never once heard any Shinner, any Republican saying we will take back land. And I told him, look, go on, that's a great one to spread to your own people, put up fear and then sort of, to encourage violence. But it was, and Jude, so I think that sort of thing, what you're saying, and we discussed it, will absolutely give ground to those people who sort of say, hey, we need to fight because this is we will put off our land. I think that's dangerous.
I think you're right, Pat. I was being a bit facetious when I said it. But I think it would help though to acknowledge what happened, and maybe even to acknowledge the injustice of it. Like, I mean, if Tony Blair can say sorry for the famine, or was it Tony Blair? No,
it was Tony Blair.
Tony Blair. If he can say he's sorry for the famine, then likewise, people could say we're sorry, that Native people were suffered. But that's the past.
It was an injustice done to the Native people of America. There was a Native, what they called the Aborigines in Australia, were I think treated as cattle or property. Up until 90 years ago, they weren't even considered people. So there's the old British tradition has tentacles going far and wide because the British system embraced both America and Australia.
I mean, it wasn't just the Brits in France or in Canada. The French, they talked about
Well, the
native people.
Belgians were in Africa as well, in the Congo. So
And the sauvage was the word that the French used for the native people. The native people of France. Savages. That's what they called them. And that's why they treated them. So it wasn't just an exclusive thing of British. Anyway, it's an interesting little side number. Anyhow, let's get to something rather more important. Finally, I will not spend long on it, and that is Derry Girls. It's been a huge hit all over the world. Everybody, you say Derry Girls. In fact, if you say Derry throughout the world now, the people say, "Oh yeah, Derry Girls, Derry Girls." Yeah. And your question is, has it changed the whole perception of Derry?
I'm going to ask Jude.
Well, so I don't know. I don't know what the perception.
You're the cultured person here.
I get that. I don't think Derry's perception needed to be changed, or the perception of Derry needed to be changed. I think the perception of Derry, generally speaking, was pretty favourable. The people who were there were seen as having suffered a lot during the Troubles. They were seen as a people who were very lively, good sense of humour, very musical. Derry always was a centre for music and for traditional arts and so on, for the culture. So it was already a favourable image that people carried around with them. I think the Derry Girls has added enormously to it because, if you like, it trumped the Troubles. It went into the Troubles, and it didn't tell a lie about the Troubles. It didn't tell a lie about them, Pat. I think they told the truth. That for many people, for many young girls, it was, that soldier's quite nice. I fancy him. So that element of humanity in it was quite good. But I'll tell you now, I hit myself for this, and I wanted it not to happen. But I don't enjoy Derry Girls as a program.
No, I watch it. No, I'm not the biggest fan of Jude, but I do think it's the biggest comedy hit Channel 4 has had for decades. It's on Netflix, and it is the Derry. Hey Jude, every time I watch it, I have to. Now, there's a beautiful line the last day. One of the aunt, this fella is very good looking. She says, "Seeing you're so good looking, are you not supposed to be thick?" No, in other words, because he was intelligent. But it was a lovely wee line. It was a lovely wee observation. But there's been Jude, what I think it does. Your observation about Derry as well. It sent rather than London Derry Girls. There's a point being made there. And that's important, that whole thing about culture and the name of the place and so on. But there's also that nice thing. The Derry I had spent my youth in, that's the Derry that comes across in Derry Girls. And underneath all the Troubles and all the rest of it, there were great humanity, great humour. And I have to say, great people. I'm a Donegal man, and I'm a very proud one, and I'll never be from it. But Jesus, I love Derry, I really do. And I think the people are absolutely fantastic. They lived through really bad times, and they still kept their humanity.
I think that's true. I think that's very important, because I think all over the north, but maybe particularly in Derry, when the Troubles were raging, people found a way to live. They found a way to worry about other things, or be amused by other things, or grieve for other things. Life went on at the same time as the disruption of the Troubles and all the savagery and bad things that happened. And in a sense, it was a sort of a triumph of the human spirit. I mean, that sounds very pompous, but that essentially is what it is.
Really. That's exactly what it was.
It was a great thing. Okay, right, Pat, go back to your sick bed this minute.
Go back there.
I do appreciate it. Seriously, I don't mean to suggest for a moment I'm unsympathetic. I didn't expect that you would be here today at all. So it must be.
The show must go on, Dr. Collins.
Okay. What was it? Dr. Work at work. Say when you go to work, the Dr. Work comes into place. Okay, Pat. Thanks very much. Okay, look after yourself now. Look after yourself. Okay, bye.